Welcome to the fifth lesson of the French Revolution. Read the knowledge organiser carefully before you begin. Take particular note of the following words: bourgeoisie, intelligentsia, tabloid, liberty, equality, fraternity, rights of man, Voltaire, constitution, and National Assembly. Once you've done this, complete the Google form labelled Lesson 5 Knowledge Organiser Quiz. Pause while you do this. Slide 2. The next slides refer to the second task. Lesson 5, What were the causes of the French Revolution, Part 3. If you've got as far as the video, you're already on this document, so continue to work through it as you listen to the presentation. So far, we have looked at 4 of the causes of the French Revolution: the financial and political crises of 1789, the effect of war, and corruption and scandal. Today, we'll begin by looking at the new ideas that were becoming popular in late 18th century France. This era in world history is often referred to as the Age of Enlightenment. This is a period of history where scientists and philosophers began to reject religion and superstition as ways of explaining the world around them. Many historians consider Sir Isaac Newton as the first great scientist of the Enlightenment age. He observed that an invisible force, gravity, caused an object with mass to fall towards the centre of the Earth. He called this force gravity. Soon, people from other branches of study began to apply the process of observing, making notes, and basing new ideas on their conclusions. Philosophers began to question the way people were governed and questioned the old system of the ancien regime and whether a king had the right to rule a country. These Enlightenment thinkers were mostly well-educated members of the second and third estate who questioned the old order of things. These people are referred to as the intelligentsia. The words in bold are in the knowledge organiser. Look them up if you don't understand them. Who were the intelligentsia? In the past, only wealthy members of the second estate and the royal family were able to access education. Learning to read and write was expensive as there were no public schools. Instead, children would either be sent away to an expensive college or taught at home by a private tutor. Some of the second estate were trained to become clergy and made up the first estate. This made the two groups very closely linked and ensured that they had similar ideas and ways of thinking. Now that trade ships could travel the world buying and selling goods in cities such as Paris, there were new opportunities for members of the third estate to make money as merchants. Some of these merchants became wealthy enough to send their sons to school and university, but as members of the third estate, they didn't see the world in the same way as their classmates. When they graduated in subjects such as science, politics, history, philosophy, and law, they began to write books and communicate with each other about new ideas of how the world could be organized differently. These people will be known as the intelligentsia. What did they believe? Because the intelligentsia came mostly from the third estate, they believed that the way the world had been run by kings, the church, and nobility was deeply unfair. They thought that a much fairer society could be built based on ideas such as democracy and justice. Voltaire is an excellent example of an Enlightenment thinker. He was not religious and believed that the church had far too much power and should be separate from the government. He believed in freedom of speech, that people should be free to say and write what they wanted, even if it upset important people like the king. He wrote novels that satirized, made fun of, the royal family, the church, and nobles, which upset the people who ruled France, but made him incredibly unpopular among the intelligentsia and the ordinary people. Voltaire died in 1788, a year before the Revolution, but the revolutionary slogan Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité was written by men who read the novels of Voltaire. When the National Assembly wrote their new constitution called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, it contained many of Voltaire's ideas. How did they spread their message? Voltaire wrote many books, but perhaps his most important writing was his letters to other members of the intelligentsia. These educated men exchanged letters constantly, which allowed their ideas to spread quickly. Soon, anyone who could read and write was able to read these ideas too, as books containing Enlightenment ideas flooded book markets in cities like Paris. As merchants began to invest in factories to make goods such as tools, clothes, and furniture from the goods they bought from abroad, poor peasants and farm labourers began to move to Paris in large numbers to take up work in factories. These factory workers who moved to cities increasingly had the opportunity to learn how to read and write, which was unavailable to them in small villages. Some of these urban workers read Voltaire, but most read tabloid newspapers and pamphlets. These relied on stories of corruption and scandal to grab readers' attention. The more sensational the gossip, the more people would read it. So these tabloids increasingly lied and exaggerated to appeal to their readers. But amongst this fake news were ideas about democracy, free speech, and justice. These, these next slides relate to the third document, Lesson 5 Exam Style Questions. Write a dictionary definition for the word intelligentsia. Who were they? What did they believe? How did they spread their message? Describe two new ideas that Voltaire spread to the people of France. 4 marks. Refer to the ideas of liberté, égalité, and fraternité. Describe two features for 1 mark. Give extra detail for another mark, and do this twice. Pause while you complete these 4-mark questions by typing into the Google document. This should take no more than 5 or 6 minutes. We now move on to the 6th and final cause of the French Revolution, property rights. So far, we've looked at 5 of the causes of the French Revolution: the financial and political crises of 1789, the effect of war, corruption and scandal, and the new ideas that were sweeping France. Here we will investigate the property rights which were causing trouble for Louis XVI. Here are 5 pictures of the Palace of Versailles, just outside Paris. It's one of France's most popular places for tourists to visit and has changed little since Louis XIV and his family lived there. You can walk through the building and its gardens and even see the King and Queen's bedroom. The Palace of Versailles was completed in 1682 by Louis XIV and had been the home of every king of France since. It was incredibly expensive and was built as a show of wealth and power of the French royal family. Its design was so impressive that it was copied by other monarchs across Europe. Sanssouci Palace in Potsdam, Germany, and the Peterhof Palace in St. Petersburg, Russia are good examples. In the year 2000, it was estimated that construction of the palace would have cost around $2 billion in today's money. However, despite the cost, the people of France didn't mind the king spending so much money. At the time, France was rich and getting richer, so people were proud that their king could afford such a spectacular palace. It made them feel like their king was wealthier and richer than all the other kings of Europe. But when the money had run out and people were struggling to feed their families, people began to wonder whether this was a sensible use of their tax money. The Third Estate began to wonder why the king, who was doing a terrible job, should have so much, while they had so little. The Third Estate could own no land, and were becoming frustrated that the king, the church, and the nobility owned so much and did so little work for it. The bourgeoisie in particular felt that it was unfair that they had worked hard to make their money, but could never own the kind of things the king and the first 2 estates owned. You will find several questions in your assignment based on this source. Read it carefully. Figure A. Property ownership in pre-revolutionary France. The land owned by the Third Estate was leasehold. This meant they could buy and sell it, but they only owned it for a limited period, at which point they had to pay to extend the lease or return it to its original owner. Feel free to pause this presentation while you answer these questions. Stop when you get to Figure B. This question appears as question 3 on your exam style questions document. Now is a good time to pause while you spend 5 or 6 minutes typing your answer into the document. Why was the political system in France unfair? Write in full sentences, give 2 reasons, and explain why this made the ordinary people angry. Figure B shows a comparison between the political systems of Britain, America, and France. You will see how old-fashioned France had become. Who owned the land? In Britain, the monarch and nobles owned a lot of land, but the middle classes were able to buy it off them, and they did. In America, there were no kings or nobility, which meant that all the land was owned by commoners. However, in France, the king and first 2 estates owned the best land. Ordinary French people owned very little. Who ran the country? In Britain, the monarch had limited power. The prime minister was middle class and ran the country. In America, ordinary people voted for a president who was wealthy but still a commoner. In France, the king had absolute power. His advisors came only from the clergy and nobility. Who could vote? In Britain, any man who owned land could vote. In America, all men over 18 could vote, but slaves and women could not. In France, there was no parliament, so nobody could vote. How could you get rid of a leader? In Britain, you couldn't get rid of the monarch, but a new prime minister was elected every 5 years. In America, a new president was elected every 4 years. But in France, a king could not be removed. The only way to get rid of him would be to overthrow him in a revolution. Complete the next questions in your main assignment, but stop when you get to figures C and D. Answer question 4 on the exam questions document. You may pause to complete these questions. These are 2 sources which refer to Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. After reading them thoroughly, you may complete this section of your main assignment. If the people have no bread, let them eat cake. Marie Antoinette. Figure C. A quote attributed to Marie Antoinette when she heard that the people of France were starving. It was supposed to show that she was completely uncaring about the ordinary people. She almost certainly never said this, but people believed the tabloid newspapers who published the quote anyway. Figure D. A picture of Louis XVI depicted as a pig. Louis was known to be overweight, which was unsurprising given the amount of money he spent on food and wine. Pigs are considered to be dirty, stupid animals in French culture. The final section of the assignment is your exit ticket. Complete this when you've finished all the other tasks and your exam questions. This is question 5 in your exam questions task. Pause while you complete this question. The next 2 slides refer to the final question in your exam questions task. Interpretation A. Painted in 1777, it shows Louis XVI in his coronation robes. He had been king for 3 years. The painting was paid for by Louis XVI and still hangs in the Palace of Versailles. In 1774, Louis was crowned King of France, and for the first few years he was popular. In 1777, when this portrait was made, Louis was a young king who was expected to rule for many years. People followed the king's rules because the people of France always had. The royal family was popular and well respected. Interpretation B. Painted in 1792, 3 years after the beginning of the revolution. At this point, Louis had no real power and was a hated figure. This picture appeared as a cartoon in a popular magazine for the general public. By 1792, the king was no longer in charge of France. The power now lay with the National Assembly, who had written a new constitution. The tabloid newspapers constantly made fun of Louis. They accused him of being a fat, lazy alcoholic and constantly made fun of him. In this picture, he'd been made to wear a cap, which was commonly worn by factory workers. This was to show that he was now just an ordinary man, nothing special. The humiliation is made complete by wearing a cockade, a kind of rosette worn by revolutionaries. This is your final exam style question. Look closely at the sources and read the caption thoroughly. Why are the interpretations of Louis XVI different? 4 marks. Identify one reason why they are different. Think about where the artists got their information. Reference the dates they were painted. Give some details about what the artist has painted. These paintings are clearly very different. This is because of the time they were painted. There are clues to this in the caption. This is the end of the presentation and the end of the section on the cause of the French Revolution. Next lesson, we will try to tie these causes together and write an extended piece of writing on what caused the French Revolution. Next term, we'll look at what happened after 1789 when things get increasingly violent. Best of luck with these tasks and feel free to contact me if you need any help. Those of you that have handed work in so far, I've been very impressed with the standard of your work. I'm very proud of you all for working so hard under these difficult circumstances.